Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews. Today we talk about Half-Life 1, a classic in the first-person shooter genre. Though I should be more specific, we are going to talk about Half-Life Source since that is the version that I own. I received it for free when I bought Half-Life 2 all those years ago, and I played a demo for the PlayStation 2 version of Half-Life before. But this Source version was my real first go at the complete game. Now back in that time I did not get very far, maybe an hour or so in, because I really wanted to play Half-Life 2 rather than the old game. Now finally, so many years later, I returned to the game, which was now also featured in my very first video on the main Konoha channel, and I finally completed it for the first time. And has it aged well? On some parts definitely, though in other parts not so much. Let's take a deep dive in this fascinating classic. So Half-Life 2 was released back in 1998, same year that Jurassic Park Trespasser was released as well. But unlike that game, Half-Life took the world by storm. Again, during 1998, console gamers played games like Resident Evil 2, Zelda Ocarina of Time, and Metal Gear Solid 1. All very great games, but not all that cinematic. Half-Life 1 in a way was the very first-person shooter game that captured this cinematic experience where there were no cutscenes in the game, but rather you were in control of your character the entire time, even when NPCs would talk to you. The story would be told through this dialogue of NPCs, and every NPC had something to say. The story itself was nothing special. You were scientists and an experiment goes wrong where a portal opens as aliens invade the facility and Earth. But it was the delivery of this story that was so groundbreaking. The world was so believable with things happening everywhere. The build-up was so good, with you in the beginning just going to work, but you wanted to explore every nook and cranny in this facility. And it is a great way to do this too. I absolutely love exposition in games. This is usually when there's no action, but purely atmosphere, as you walk around and can hear people talking. Medal of Honor, for example, has brief moments like that, and many other shooters got that as well. It's just you really get to enjoy the environments and taking it all in, and Half-Life 1 was the first that took this approach, even being more perfected in Half-Life 2 6 years later. The first 2 hours are easily the best in my opinion. When the experiment goes wrong, the entire facility is in shambles and people are dead left and right. It almost has somewhat of a horror atmosphere, with mutilated bodies and zombies and facehugger type headcrabs everywhere. With the Source engine, a few new tweaks get made to the game in terms of graphics. The lighting uses the same lighting as Half-Life 2, and so do the shadows. The water has the same texture for Half-Life 2, and they use the same particle effects, sound, and also use some of the physics. Yet it still keeps the look and feel of the old game in my opinion, since the world's textures look the same. You can choose to have higher detailed models of the weapons and characters, but that is entirely optional. The cool thing about the first 2 hours is just the scale of the incident at the facility. It genuinely feels like a large-scale horrible event that affects hundreds of characters. As you traverse through the facility, you often stumble upon other scientists and security guards. Sometimes you see them in a scripted event where they crash down an elevator, get stuck into an air duct, or try to hang on from a ledge before falling to their doom. It indeed gives away a vibe where all these people are trying to save themselves from the catastrophe. What's cool too is that many of these scientists and guards can accompany you for short times throughout the levels. The AI pathing does a very good job of staying near you, and the ones armed with weapons don't do a half bad job of killing the enemies. They do good damage, and can kill a zombie with 3 or 4 shots. If you play your cards right, you can also have multiple NPCs follow you, and in a certain part, I even had 6 NPCs follow me, of which 3 had weapons, so we were kind of an unstoppable force. The fact that you can do this is very cool even for today. At a certain point, government forces arrive that are tasked with purging the entire facility. That means the scientists too. These new human NPCs become your enemy too, and they are really quite tough. They do high damage, move frequently, and are a challenge to defeat. I was quite impressed. You also face some other aliens as well, but overall around the mid part is where the game starts to waver a little bit for me. Now don't get me wrong, this change of enemy types and you heading towards the outsides of the facility must have been incredible back then, but these are some of the parts that have not aged well. you run into less interesting things in the environment, have to do some platforming puzzles which don't work great in first person, and some sections like the train ride just go on forever. Half-Life 2 does the pacing a lot better, I think, where each section lasts exactly as long as it needs to. Whenever you are at the end of Ravenholm, you are kinda done with Ravenholm, or the same can be said for the hovercraft through the canal section. But that same pacing is not yet established here, unfortunately. At a certain point you get outside, and these levels have also not aged all that well. The textures here are a little boring to look at, since it's just barren desert, much less interesting than a facility where everything went haywire. You have an interesting arsenal of weapons to choose from, and even some very unique ones like unleashing bugs that will swarm the enemy or a charged up laser. Then at a certain point you go to the alien world. This is basically only the final hour of the game, but boy does this area suck in my opinion. Has it aged well? Absolutely not. Though it looks neat for the first maybe 2 or 3 minutes, you soon will see that it's quite ugly and empty. There are some boss fights here, but the boss fights are very repetitive and get boring fast with you just shooting the same weak spot over and over and over again. There also isn't that much feedback in particle effects to let you know if you're doing it right. The levels here also get quite frustrating with enemy spam being very frequent. You will die here a lot. It just loses its charm very quickly and is plain and simple not fun. It probably was very special back then in 1998 and a twist that no one saw coming. But nowadays, it's not impressive and we've seen this twist done better. By the end when I was playing these alien levels, I just wished the game would be over already. A notion I never thought I would say regarding a game so famous as Half-Life 1. But that's when it made me realize something. I adore Half-Life 2 a lot. So much so that it is in my top 10 best games of all time. And I think that game has aged very gracefully, with still being such a great joy to play today. But Half-Life 1, though undoubtedly a profound and revolutionary game for its time, has not aged all that well. The cinematic style has been overtaken by more modern games, whereas Half-Life 2 still impresses today with its production design, art design, and physics. Half-Life 1 is the strongest when it has that horror or rampage movie style chaos in the first 2 hours, and I would definitely recommend you check that out to see if it can hook you into keeping playing. But the second half, and especially the Alien Planet sections, are just not all that good by today's standards. In the end, Half-Life 1 gets a 7.6. You can still see how it was so revolutionary back then, and there are still parts to be enjoyed immensely. But it is one of those titles where time just hasn't been all good on it. I definitely do want to revisit this campaign with the Black Mesa game, which of course started out as a mod but ended up being treated as a remake game on Steam. From what I understand, they did not only update the graphics drastically, but even redesigned the levels and entire parts, promising a better experience for example, the Alien Planet levels. Thank God I was not the only one who thought those sections weren't as good. I'm very curious if that game can use the same story and campaign, but up the score to maybe an 8 or higher.